Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to be making a character concept using Crease Pencil in Blender, and the purpose for the concept is to ultimately model the character in 3D. So it's kind of designing the character for myself, figuring out what the character is supposed to look like, and keeping in mind that I'm going to be modeling that character as well. So in this video I'm going over just the sketching out using Crease Pencil, and then at around the 9-minute mark I'm starting to use the modeling tools as well to model out some parts of the character so that I can draw over it. And then around the 15-minute mark I'm gonna do the coloring. Then around the 20-minute mark the line work on top of the coloring. Around the 27 mark the shading, so the shadows and stuff like that. And then around the 31-minute mark I'm gonna do some gradient work, and then in the very end I'm gonna sketch out like a back view as well for the character, just to figure out for myself kind of how the back of that character is supposed to look like. So at this point I'm just sketching out the character using just a basic black line and the sketch brush, and I want to capture this kind of goblin archer character. That's what I want to do, and it's supposed to be a female character. And all of these characters, they're kind of like, they're intelligent characters, but they have, they're kind of a little bit they have like a naughty smile by default. So all the characters have that kind of smile, and this is one of the goblins that's supposed to be a little bit more kind of a little bit more powerful, a little bit stronger. So the gear that I'm going to give the character is going to be a little bit like higher end instead of scraps like some of the other goblins that I give them. So the trick here is that the character is supposed to look kind of female, but then the basic concept of a goblin is not necessarily female. So I don't want to make it like a standard beautiful female character. It still has to maintain that kind of creepy goblin look as well. So what I found is that for these characters, like I've sketched enough of these now that I'm comfortable starting with the head, just blocking out the head a little bit, and all of those have like those pitch black eyeballs. So I'm like reusing parts of the previous goblins that I worked on to kind of tie them in together. And so here you see I'm kind of messing around trying to figure out how to make this character's face look a little bit more female. And this is the cool part about sketching in Blender, is that they have this, the ability to sculpt your lines. So once you drew the lines, you can just select your lines and then sculpt them, or you don't even have to select them. You can just sculpt them. But if you have them selected, you can kind of selectively move around lines without affecting the other lines, which is kind of cool. And that's one of the main reasons why I'm doing concept work in Blender compared to Photoshop or any other software. So as you saw, I'm kind of getting more of a female look in the face, and I gave the character also a little bit of it's not really a mohawk, it's just like it's going to be more of a ponytail kind of thing. So I'm just kind of figuring out how the clothing should look, and the character is gonna be an archer, so she's gonna have a bow, and I've worked on several kind of archer models in the past, and I noticed that they usually have this kind of like asymmetrical breastplate that protects them from, I think it's from the string of the bow, or I'm sure it has like a real purpose, but it identifies an archer kind of. I'm also adding like a hood to the character, because it's another element that you see a lot of these kind of fantasy archers have. So working with some cliches to kind of sell the character, and these characters are supposed to be kind of simple in their, like, I don't want to go too detailed. You see here I added another layer, and I just drew some lines with a symmetry modifier, and this is just some guidelines that I set up because I have a tendency to have my character slowly lean towards one side. And working in Blender, it's very easy also to just flip your character by just rotating to the other side, to the back view. So it's always good to do that while you're working. But those symmetry lines that I drew, they kind of help me anchor the symmetry. And I don't want to sketch in symmetry, because then there's it just gets this kind of uncanny artificial look. So I sometimes do it just to block something out, to get some guides, but in general I prefer doing the sketching non-symmetrical, or not using the symmetry modifier. So here you have the character more or less blocked out, and now I'm kind of trying to figure out how to like position the arms and the hands, and how she's going to be carrying that bow. And this is kind of a difficult thing for me. I'm not a trained concept artist, and this is the part, the arms, and how to position the arms in like a natural pose, but at the same time saying something about the character, is something that I haven't really mastered quite well, or I haven't learned how to do that quite well. One thing recently that I've found is that I'm able to get a lot more comfortable creating a natural pose for a character by starting from the bottom up. So instead of starting with the head, starting with the feet and then the legs, and kind of, because I feel like a lot of the attitude of a character is how they stand, and that kind of it kind of anchors in the how the legs are positioned. And so that helped me a lot, just to start with the legs. In this character I started with the head, but then you saw I went to the legs right after that. But I haven't quite been able to figure that out with the arms and how to position the arms. So I think that's one of the things I'm going to be focusing on when I'm going to be doing more kind of sketches and training my concepting skills. And I decided also to give the character these kind of high boots, so the boots are like over her knees, as opposed to some of the other goblins I have. They all have kind of low boots, and this is my way of kind of separating her and making her a little bit more refined, making her a little bit more kind of richer, or more wealthy, more powerful, that kind of thing. There's another one of the goblins that has the same thing going on. It's the mage, or the magician goblin, and that one also has like a little bit more refined clothing and stuff like that. And I want to have that in this kind of set, where you can clearly see which of these is more powerful of an enemy, or more powerful of a character than the other ones, and clothing and how well they're dressed and stuff like that helps. So you saw there also, like, one of the advantages of working in Blender is that you can select strokes or parts of a stroke in edit mode, and then you can kind of expand the selection by selecting everything that's linked to it, and then you can use any of your regular modeling tools, or regular transform tools on that, so rotating and moving them around. So it allows you to really edit the what you have blocked out already in kind of a fast and efficient way, instead of whereas if you're working in Photoshop, you have to kind of use your marquee selection tools to kind of make a selection, but expanding that selection is not really possible because you're working on pixels instead of what you have here, which is actual point and line geometry. So now I figured that I'm not skilled enough to properly draw this bow in perspective. So here I'm just modeling a quick block out of a bow, and so that I can then position it in 3D, and then I can draw on top of that. So I'm just kind of doing something, just a simple thing. It doesn't have to be refined at all. I just want to have that basic kind of fantasy bow look. And the important thing is that it has some depth, so that the whole point of it is to get the perspective right. And if it doesn't have any depth, then it doesn't really help me much. So now that I have that, I'm just merging all the or applying all the modifiers, and then moving it around, rotating it, getting it into the position that feels right. And this is where, again, like, I'm struggling a little bit. I want the character to be carrying the bow. I want a front view, but at the same time I want it to kind of look like a concept, like kind of a natural kind of feel. And so I ended up just having her hold the bow vertically and kind of leaning on it a little bit. And now that I have that in place, I can just kind of draw over it. And sometimes I'm working in an orthographic view now the whole time, but sometimes I would switch at this point to perspective, so that the 3D object would have kind of the perspective, the depth. In this case, it's not really necessary, because it doesn't have that much depth. It's more like just a vertical thing. So it helps me just get like the basic angles and stuff like that, how I want it. And a good thing that I found is when I do these kind of placeholder 3D models, is to give them obvious loops and to not smooth the mesh, to keep them faceted, because then you can kind of see the loops in the 3D model, and that helps you kind of define the shape of the object as well. So you see on the bow I have those those loops, the horizontal loops from top to bottom, and they kind of curve depending on how the bow is bent, and it kind of helps sell the fact that it's not just a stick, but it's a bent stick. So now the character is quite detailed, and I don't want to make it more detailed than it is right now. I just want to keep kind of the simple shapes, but refine it a little bit more. And I'm not, like, the whole torso part, I'm not sure what to do with it. Most of the goblin characters are bare chested, but for this character I kind of want to, like, she is supposed to be a little bit like stronger and wealthier, I guess. So I eventually end up kind of giving her like a little bit of a shirt or tunic, and still keeping those armor pieces on top without it getting too busy. So if you want to skip forward to the 15-minute mark, I'm gonna be starting to color it at that point. So at this point I have the whole thing kind of sketched out, and now I'm just using some pre-made materials that I made for the other goblins, and I'm just using the there's a fill on the material, but not a line or not an outline. So I'm just like drawing on a new layer on top of the sketch or under the sketch, and I'm using the edit tool to select the edges I want selected, and then I'm using the scope to kind of smooth what I drew and push and pull it around a little bit to have it roughly fit within the boundaries of the sketch. And I'm going to be doing this now, for every part of the character that should have a different color or different material. And it's not super important that you're getting the colors right at this point. It's just important that you have a different material for what you want to be a different material in the end. And we can go back into these materials later on and edit them or change the color on them however we want later on, which is another one of the advantages of doing this in Blender, is that you have these kind of global materials that you can edit at any time, and it will update whatever is using those materials. And then aside from that, you can also select these blockouts of color and change the material, just assign another material that you have. The only thing I have to be aware of is that in this file I have a bunch of other goblins. So for example, the skin of this character is shared with a bunch of other characters as well. So if I change the material to make her skin a little bit darker, it's going to do that on the other concepts I have as well, which is not something I want. So in this case I would have to ideally duplicate the material or make a new material that is unique to this asset. And that whole setup is kind of a little bit, it's not necessarily buggy at the moment, but it doesn't work super well. So just duplicating a material I don't think works at the moment. It just creates a new material that you have to set up from scratch, and that's a little bit annoying because the new material by default for some reason is transparent as well, so then you have to tweak the transparency, and it's not ideal right now. So there's definite limitations to concepting or 2D concepting in Blender at the moment, and in my opinion those limitations lie mainly with the coloring process, or how you're shading the character. You can't really color the character by doing brush strokes. You have to do this kind of lasso selections and fill them in like that. And it has advantages. Like for what I'm doing here, this works perfectly, and I think it's almost better than doing it with brush strokes. But when I get to the shading part, which is gonna be at around the 27-minute mark, like you're kind of limited to these kind of cell shaded looks. So it's not like you can kind of mix using a mix brush and kind of get a smooth transition from dark areas to light areas. Like you can't really render out your colors like you would in Photoshop or another painting tool. So I'm just like very quickly going through all of this, and I sped up the video quite a bit at this point because this is just kind of repetitive, and in some cases I'm making a new material as I go along. In other cases I'm just reusing the same material. I don't want to I want to keep it kind of simple, so that goes for the form language, the detail level, but it also goes for the colors. I don't want to have 60 different color profiles on this character. I want to keep it kind of minimal as much as possible. And so if you want to skip ahead a little bit at the 27-minute mark, or at the 20-minute mark, I'm gonna be doing the line work, which is basically about now, and then at the 27 mark I'm gonna be shading the character as well. So now I'm just using the ink brush and just a black line tool to or line material to just draw simple outlines on top of the sketch that I have. And this is on a new layer that's like a top layer basically. And the nice thing about, again, doing this in Blender is that you have access to these kind of I don't know what the exact term for them is, but it's these smooth tools. So if you hold down Alt, I think it's Alt, you get I think it's called like a lazy mouse kind of thing, where you're dragging a line and you can set how long that line should be, and at the end of that line the actual stroke happens. So it's like a snake kind of, and you have a lot of options as to how sensitive that should be and how long you should, how smooth that line will be. And then you also have just active smoothing and smoothing after you draw the line, so you can set that up however you want. And I found the lazy mouse tool or the lazy tool to be just really useful for stuff like that. Like I think 80% of the lines I draw, I use that lazy function, and it helps that it's a shortcut. Like if you hold down Alt, you're using that. If you hold down Shift while drawing a line, you're drawing a straight line. And I don't use it in this concept, but just a little tip for when you do use it. It's best to start drawing the line first and then hold down Shift, because then it'll use the weight of when you were holding it down when you started drawing. But when you hold down Shift first, then you basically gonna draw a line that has maximum opacity and maximum thickness, which is not, you probably don't want that if you're using a stylus or an Intuos or something like that. I'm using a Huon screen tablet, which I found works really well in Blender. It does sometimes kind of block, like my hand sometimes blocks where I'm drawing the line, so sometimes I have to redraw from a different direction. And one of the things that's missing right now in Blender, to my knowledge, is the ability to rotate your canvas, kind of. So I can rotate horizontally and vertically, but I want to rotate on in this case, the y-axis, which you can do in Photoshop and most drawing tools, and it helps you kind of, draw your lines in a more comfortable way. So I hope that's something. I know there's some workarounds to that, but at the moment I found it a little bit messy, so I haven't really, just kind of ignoring it and working around it. So I'm going to be going through the whole character and kind of doing all the line work. If you want to skip ahead to the 27-minute mark, that's where I'm going to be starting to do the shading. So at this point, the whole character is colored, and now what I'm doing is I created a new layer, and I'm using a material like a dark material, and I'm setting the layer to like I think it's 0.35 opacity, and I'm using the function, it's the little dot on the layer. If you click on that, I don't know what it's called exactly, but basically what it does is anything that you draw, it will be within the bounds of what you have below that layer. So this allows you to be a little bit more sloppy, and it also allows you to stay within the boundaries of your color layer. So I'm just kind of just roughly, thinking about where the light source is and what parts of the character should have a little bit of shadow. And I'm not, an expert at this kind of stuff, so I'm kind of just doing it however I feel kind of works well. I'm sure I'm kind of doing it inaccurately in some areas, but this is kind of a learning process for me as well. So but it does help a lot with giving the character some depth, and it makes the character feel a little bit more like a solid 3D object as opposed to just a flat 2D sticker. So I'm just going along where I feel it makes sense, and then I'm gonna do the same with highlights. And for the highlight, I create a new layer, and I set that layer to add blend type instead of a multiply. So right now this is a multiply blend type, and the new layer for the highlights will have the add blend type. So if you skip to 31-minute mark, I'm gonna do a simple gradient, and then after that gradient I'm gonna be doing a quick sketch for the back view, which will be helpful when I'm gonna be modeling the character. So now what I'm doing is I'm creating a new layer and a new material, and the material is basically just a gradient, and I'm just drawing the whole like around the character. I'm filling the whole character, and I'm again using this fill functionality so that it's within the bounds of the layers below it. And now I'm just using the gradient settings to get a gradient that kind of works where the bottom is dark, and as it goes up towards the top of the character it gets lighter. And this is a little bit tricky, like the functionality here is very unintuitive, and it's very messy to get what you want. It's hard to control, and yeah, I don't like exactly how this gradient stuff is set up. I think they could have it be they could do it in a much more intuitive way and simple way, just like it is in Photoshop with the gradient tool. So it's not ideal at the moment, but I think it's worth it for what you get in the end. So a little trick here is that I with the gradient, I set both colors to 50% gray, and I put the layer on overlay, and that basically means that it has no effect on what's below it. And then I gradually started tweaking the one of the colors of the gradient to make it darker or lighter, and then you can get kind of the look that you're after. Now I'm just adding some little details, some highlights in the eyes, and some additional coloring that I missed, and then to top it off, I'm just adding like a shadow layer as well. But because the whole layering system is a little bit buggy at the moment, sometimes when you add a new layer on top of your lines, you get an issue with like it pixelates your lines and stuff like that. So it's best to not have a lot of layers at the moment, but I'm sure they'll fix that later. So I'm just instead using the effect, the shadow effect in the effects panel, and that'll do for now. I don't like it's not ideal, but I think it's okay for what we're after. So now I decide to do a quick like back view of the character as well, because I need to figure out when I'm going to be modeling the character what that character's, you know, how the back is supposed to look, and how the stuff that you see on the front connects to the back and all that kind of stuff. So instead of making a new layer, I just duplicate the crease pencil object, and then I'm just erasing all of the interior parts of the sketch that I had. And this allows me to keep the outline, because the outline is essentially going to be the same on the front and the back. The only thing I'm doing here is I select all the lines, and then I do Control M and press X, and this flips the line work, because I want it to be like an accurate back view. So now I'm just like, again, just blocking out, sketching what I think this character should look like from the back. And I'm just doing it very roughly, because all I want to do is kind of figure it out for myself, how it should work. And the only problem I run into at this point a little bit is I have the hood, and I want the hood to be not just a floating hood, it needs to be connected to something. So I end up making it more of like a cape, a hooded cape. But then I also need to have a quiver, the arrows. She has to be able to get the arrows from somewhere. So then the quiver is, I guess, supposed to be under the cape, but then that complicates everything a little bit. So I'm struggling a little bit with that, trying to figure out what the best way is to have the quiver. But that's probably something I'll figure out in the modeling process as well. So anyway, this is the whole process. It's sped up in a lot of areas quite significantly, because I want to make this video, not a 2-hour video, but just 35 minutes. Maybe later on I'll make a more detailed video where I'm not speeding stuff up that much. If you would like that, let me know in the comments. If there's anything else that you're struggling with in Blender with the crease pencil, let me know, and I can see if I can do more detailed videos on this topic. Thank you for watching.